My name is Simon Pickard, and this is the walls of Jericho. I love the Bible itself and believe in all of that. So when I come across this collapsing technique, it was kind of like this just a marriage in heaven for me, excuse the pun. But it was all about sort of this technique of trying to make it look like everything is collapsing, which naturally doesn't stay in place. So the challenge is finding the right kind of twists and bends and rotating pieces that will hold it all in, and then try and hide the fact that they're there all together. And I'm always very keen to go away from the transparent bricks, while they are an appropriate and sort of considered okay to do. The effect is best achieved by that sort of hidden nature of it. So most people love the dramatic fall on the tower, but my preference was the smaller section here because I felt like the whole crumble effect was much more effective. Plus, that travels like that. I have to take all the other bits off for safety. But yeah, a lot of people don't really. It's actually a totally 3D display, so three-dimensional display, and you can see from the back that there's a whole range of other little nuggets and things. My personal favourite feature, assuming they hadn't knocked some of the figures over, is I've very carefully chosen different faces. So this is actually a caroller's face from one of the Winter Village sets. Yeah, but it looks the shock, and I always have him facing the big tower that's collapsing. Yeah, in a minute when he comes back round, you'll be able to see the two faces on this side. So my other favourite is obviously the guy at the top of the tower, but my all-time favourite is the guy who's hoping his shield could possibly help.
This massive ton of rock, his shield is going to keep it up.
It wasn't just about building a great model. I actually put real careful thought into it. I know I went through hundreds of Lego faces picking the ones that really worked the best for this. So. Yeah.
Yeah, and something else I noticed here is your wall is kind of offset. It's not, set on there squarely. Yeah. Was that hard to do?
A lot of people think it would be. Over here, most people refer to it as off the grid. Okay. So the grid for us is the straight studs, right. And anything that's off the grid is understandable. In terms of the wall, I built the wall and I just put it on top of the studs. I didn't do anything special. It's literally just resting on all the studs, but it is solidly in place because if you look where some plates every now and again go right up against the wall, and there's a few all the way down, and they just actually lock the whole tower, wall section in place, so it will not slide around at all. And the only trouble I have is if I'm moving it, the wall would tip over. But I realised that actually if I built a couple of brightly coloured 2x2 brick towers, I can actually stick those wherever the wall meets those studs. And those little towers on both sides actually means the whole wall travels as it is with no packaging around it at all. It just survives.
Yeah, and you mentioned some of the figs on the wall earlier. How did you decide on some of the other minifigs in the build here as far as, I guess, looking for minifigs that kind of represented that time period and what they would have worn? Yeah, is there custom parts or anything like that? Or?
Oh, no, I never use custom parts. I like the challenge of actually trying to find something that Lego themselves had already produced, because actually it's really interesting what is out there that you don't always know about. And I guess I'm a purist in that sense, although it's not. I don't find it a problem, so maybe one day I might. But in terms of the characters, I already had this Persian-like effect of figures from a famous build of mine called the Battle of Thermopylae, and I had some left over. So that was just a natural choice to represent that nation in Jericho and looking like that. The Israelites, who are the guys at the front and obviously in the Bible story, there is some understanding of historical clothing, so I just went with that general sort of old look, and the style actually doesn't matter so much because they had so much variety within it that the parts Lego do just generically look about right for it. But tend to find history builds that you're looking at kind of like Hobbit or Lord of the Rings related figures, and figures from Star Wars that are Jedis. So anything kind of Roby related figures always work really well. The main thing, the key thing for me was to represent the characters. So obviously I wanted to represent Joshua, so he's there at the front, so he's a little more obvious that Joshua was obviously in charge. But there's another story leading up to Jericho where the spies were sent in to view Jericho, and there were 12 of them. And 10 of them came back saying about how the men were giants and how it was impossible to do this, and it just wasn't possible. And 2 men came back and said, well, actually, the gods have given us the land, and look at it, it's got grapes that are amazing, it's got beautiful this, and everything is amazing. And because of that, the Israelites in the Bible then actually spent another 40 years in the desert, and only the two men that believed in what was coming on remained. So there are two elderly men, and you can see the white hair on the one and the white beard on the other, which is a representation of the fact that they were still there at that time. And it does talk about them marching around the walls of Jericho, and at the very end, the last day of the 7, they had to do it 7 times, and then they were told to shout for God and to blow on their instruments. So I wanted to make sure there were some instruments, and I was able to use the new flute piece from one of the collectible minifigures, so I was quite pleased that came about. And I used I now do have a proper trumpet from the old Western set, but at the time I didn't, so I've actually used the clown's thing as kind of one of the trumpets.
I mean, you never know. Historical documents might not be there, but it could have been.
Well, why not? And to be honest, I think when you look at some of the creatures in the world, like a giraffe, God clearly has a sense of humour. So, yes, I think he will enjoy it anyway.
That's right. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Great build there. Thanks for talking with me about it.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.